Is this your first year here?
Yes, at the budget, yes. Yeah,
No,
I'm excited.
Somehow, hopefully budget committee meeting, to order the city of the river. Grant Polson was the chair last year. Every year, forever now.
Lifetime appointment.
No, please no. First up, our mayor has, some you'd like to talk to us.
So I suppose most of you probably know that unfortunately, Councillor Cunahan passed away over the past weekend. It was just such sad news. My phone rang. His wife Jen called to let me know, and she asked me to inform sort of this sector of his life. So many more details to come. I took some flowers over there, but we're not exactly sure. You know, she's making it through, and she was with her son at college, and so that's good. But just sort of seems worth marking this moment. This is the first meeting I've been at since that news came. So that seat is empty, and we're grateful to Tim, and we missed him, and there'll be some sort of a family service and some sort of more public commemoration. But at this first meeting, I just wanted to take the moment. Thanks all for your service. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Paul. Introduction, we'll go around and introduce ourselves. I'm just gonna remind everybody, please sign for cell phones. Again, I'm Grant Polson. I'm on the city council. I've been on budget committee for some time now. Current chair, until we choose to elect a new one. And also on the bridge authority and on the west side on the west end town. All that.
I'm Grant Berg. I'm a volunteer on the.
I'm Abigail Elder. I'm your city manager. This is my third budget with the city. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you all for being here today. Megan Saunders, I'm on city council.
Mayor Blackburn.
Joe Sheehan, volunteer for city or budget committee.
Gary Reed, volunteer, budget committee.
Tina McNerney, volunteer.
Hey, everybody, I'm Brandon Kammer, and I'm also a volunteer on the budget committee.
Doug Stepina, Hood River City Councilor and second budget season.
I'm Chris Antonetti, Finance Director, City.
And then Neil is over there. Neil, bit of a police ride.
Indian.
And then
Lisa for
Haley Ellis, city management analyst.
Piper's in the stroller.
Justin Wilson, the Director of Planning and Zoning.
And McCarty, I'm payroll AP.
Adam Schmidt, Public Works Director.
any Zoom folks.
And online as well. Todd.
Well, hi, everyone. Todd Abel, second term on the budget committee. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right, first order of business is to elect a chair. Is there anybody that would like to volunteer or be voluntold to be chair? Anybody who would like to nominate someone to be chair?
I want to nominate Grant. He's doing a great job.
Thanks. Is there anyone who'd like to second that nomination?
I'll second that.
Will, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure, great, do it. Just note for everybody, please don't make me do it every single time forever. I don't want to, everybody else should. It gives people more experience in this seat and don't rely on me. I should not be the only person doing this. Okay. Motion has been made to make me chair again. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed? Aye. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Rick.
Appreciate it.
It means anything, I want to be chair.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
My final term will be-
Same process, we need a vice chair in case I get hit the head or something, or I'm not here, or I'm taking care of Piper. Need somebody to fill in case I'm gone. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer or nominate anyone?
Carrie, how do you feel about being vice chair?
I'm not sure I'm gonna make it here next week, so I think I'm gonna be on the Zoom. I don't know if I'll be good vice chair, but I can if you want. Pretty sure he'll be here.
How about you, Megan? I nominate Megan.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a nomination and a second for Megan to be vice chair. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Welcome to the crew, vice chair.
Thank you.
Next up is approval of meeting minutes from May 10th and 18th of 2023.
Mr. Chair, I move we approve the minutes from last year.
I'll second.
You got it.
Motion by Paul, second by Doug, that we approve the minutes from last year, May 10th and 18th, 2023. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye, motion passes. Presentation of the budget message. Thank you,
Yes.
That's me.
That's Abigail.
This is one of the, Councilor Rivera is having trouble getting into Zoom, so she is watching on YouTube.
Take it away.
But so she is present.
Okay.
High tech.
Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I've got a presentation, so let me just see if I can bring that up. Here we go.
While she's bringing that up, I'll just, Councilor Zandler is in Spain with the grandchildren, so a very good excuse.
And is the provider of tonight's snacks, so we'll excuse him for being gone, so. Thank you so much for being here. I think I say this frequently that the budget time, like while I'm a little bit resentful that it happens during the beautiful May weather, this is one of my favorite times of year because a good budget makes for a good year. And so I appreciate all of the time and thoughtfulness that you will spend with us in the next couple of weeks, all of the work that you've done to prepare for these meetings so that we can keep our city financially healthy, providing the services that our residents expect. So thank you all for that. Putting together a budget is a really long process. Really for Chris and I and for the department heads, it really starts kind of in January, February, in when we are starting to review what are our revenue projections, what do we expect to receive from the state. We put together the fee schedule in February for council consideration. And then we meet with all of the departments really starting in March, April to review where do they think they're landing, what concerns do they have. So today is like, it's a bit of an accomplishment to get to this point of like all of the months that we put together. And then we finish this and then Hannah and Chris and his team all go into audit season. So be thankful that you don't have to participate in that part. So the budget is really never finished. It's just a really evolved process. You've got the agenda, but we've already worked on the selection of the chair. Congratulations, Councilor Polson and Councilor Saunders. I'm going to give you just a very high level overview, and then we'll turn it to Chris, who's really got the meat of the topics, and we'll be able to explain things in more detail. And I will say to Chris publicly, like, and to our other department heads, if I say something wrong, jump in. I want to make sure that our budget committee has the most accurate and up-to-date information. And then at the very end of my talk, I'm just going to share a tiny bit about the city council budget and the administration budget. They are in next week when we talk about the general fund, but because I have the podium or the lectern right now, I figure I might as well. So we've just gone through the budget committee introductions. Oregon is a little bit unique in how budgets are organized, that we have such a community-oriented process. Most other states don't have this transparent process. So I just want to thank you all for being members of this committee. Timeline, I know some of you were here last week to receive your budget books, and Chris gave an excellent overview. I watched it on YouTube today of how the budget is organized and how government is a little bit different than business. So thank you for that. And then today is really this very broad overview of what we're talking about. And then next week we start diving in for the deeper dive about the general fund, and then the other next week after that are the specific funds. So ask lots of tough questions today so that we can research them and get them back to you. But the next 2 weeks are really when we get into the details. So when we look at the city, and I'll talk a little bit about just some of the other projects and pieces, but just know the city's main piece are our essential services, the day-to-day work that is done by our police and our public works and our fire department and our finance group, you know, when people come to court or they're filling a pothole or getting their short-term rental license or whatever, those are the day-to-day work that happens in the city. And sometimes it feels like that's not necessarily reflected in what you see in council or what is reflected in the budget, but just know that those are the things that that we really prioritize. They don't get a lot of time and attention, but those are the foundation of what the city does on a day-to-day basis. We as staff and you as a city receive policy direction from not only just the twice a month meetings that we have at city council, but also from a number of plans and documents that have been adopted by council. So the first one there, I'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but the council work plan, that's every 2 years. We really take that deep dive. What are the things we want to focus on? What are those projects? The ones on the top row there are all city things, right? The transportation system plan, the affordable housing production strategy. We also have a number of master plans for like our wastewater master plan and our water master plan. And those are all also updated and inform a lot of the projects and stuff that you see in here. And then the bottom row there are all plans that were not necessarily created by the city, although we participated in them and we either adopted or accepted them. So the master parks plan or the multi-jurisdictional parks, is it Parks, Recreation and Open Space Plan, longest title for a plan ever. Safe Routes to School plan, you'll hear a little bit about that. And then the Energy Council, the energy plan which is a county-wide plan, but definitely informs the work we do as a city. So just know that Chris and I in departments, we don't make stuff up. We, we definitely have a lot of things that we are trying to implement in our role. I mentioned the council work plan. That's probably the most visible and one of the most important things that we do. This is a deep dive that council takes every 2 years. So we'll do this again. I actually have some dates to send out to you for early December. Council has adopted these as the goals or kind of the overguiding principles of what we're trying to achieve. And then the projects that we have check the boxes in one or more categories. Most of them check multiple categories. But housing, I heard the mayor say on the radio recently, the city's got a dozen goals and the first 3 are housing. So you can see housing still continues to be a big one for us. Equity is an important one. The city has a resolution dedicated to equity and justice. And then transportation, well-maintained and safe community, that's the kitchen sink, right? That is all the things that we do to make sure that the quality of life here in Hood River is available and that folks are safe and have opportunity to do their very best. And then sustainability, I think we've all been thinking about Councillor Cunahan's role in environmentalism and just really keeping the city with that as one of its true norths. And then parks and open space. Some of the assumptions, and Chris will talk about this in much more depth than I do, but just as we built the budget this year, some of our thoughts are, and we know this from Portland State has a population research center. They just recently did a presentation on where they expect Hood River to go. I thought it was really interesting that Hood River is aging. It's like, Adam, there's someone in the lobby. Can you go talk to him? Thank you. Hood River has always traditionally been a very young county, but it is aging. So we're starting to catch up with other parts of Oregon as we get older. I think I've heard the superintendent say the incoming kindergarten class, much smaller than the graduating class. So we see our county as a whole is starting to go through kind of a change. So and I think we all are aware that housing continues to be a drag on our local economy. That's what we hear from employers and we as a city struggle to recruit in part because of housing costs. Inflation slowing, but still definitely a factor. We see that staffing costs and Chris could talk about this more, particularly PERS. The city's done some good work in previous years to help us secure our location with PERS. That's our retirement account for our employees, but it will continue to rise. And then this is like, and I don't know quite yet, but possible changes to state revenue. So this is gas tax, right? As vehicles become more efficient and the state struggles, you probably saw headlines about how ODOT changed some of its snow plowing schedules this year. Like that has a direct impact on us because we have state highways that come through here. This year, there was a measure in the legislature to take property tax revenue that the state receives and dedicate it to wildfires. That was a real change. It got withdrawn pretty quickly, but there are things happening at the state legislature that we're always kind of watching about how those revenues trickle down to the cities. Our overall, goal as you as a budget committee and us as staff are, to be responsible stewards. This town is so, we're in a good place generally, financially speaking, because of the actions of past budget committees, and we want to continue that legacy. So we want to be transparent and accountable. We generally have good audits. We have budget policies. They're in the back of your budget book if you haven't reviewed them. And we've talked about needing to review those and update on a regular basis. There are some things there that probably need to be checked. We'll probably do that outside of the budget cycle. We want to ensure the long-term fiscal health, and this is always we don't want to spend one-time dollars on ongoing things, right? One-time dollars for one-time things. And then we continue to study. So we are in, is it year 4 or year 3 of a utility rate study? We're in the middle of it. So every a 5-year study. So we'll get ready to start doing that. We're currently doing a system development charge study. We adjusted building rates. We added an RV dumping fee this year. So we continue to look at what are the costs. Is that a?
I just,
Yeah.
ways that people can dump a lot of stuff there.
That's right. So this is.
3 different kinds of dump there.
Yep, and Adam, our public works director who's behind you, did an analysis, is being so close, so conveniently located off the freeway. And being free, I think we were receiving more than our fair share of dumping from RVs and commercial businesses. So we've instituted a fee. We actually have a Calais machine, just like the parking meters out here. At this point, it's really on an honor system. We trust people to pay, and I think people have done that. That's a service people expect to pay for, and we just hadn't charged in the past. So looking for those opportunities where the city can recognize there's a cost, and how can we get cost recovery responsibly. Other things I think we as a city have really stepped up is we're trying to look for outside funding where appropriate. Every time the congressionally directed spending opportunities come out, we do a deep dive. We meet with the Senator Wyden, Senator Merkley, Representative Blumenauer staff, so that they are aware of what the issues are. I was at a conference last week and I ran into Representative Ken Helm. He's the chair of the Water Caucus for the legislature. I talked about some specific Hood River issues that maybe could be addressed at the state with some state funding. So we continue to be pretty assertive about this. Last year we received a state fire marshal grant, which is over 4 years. Is that right? It's a good chunk of change that provides for a firefighter, provided, most of the funding for the first year, and then it's a step down. But there's a position we wanted to add, but we didn't feel we could add without additional outside funding. And so
Yeah, I think it was
3 years. So we're currently starting a development code audit. We received funds from the state, from DLCD for that. And then just very recently, the state legislature has provided $2.4 million for water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure related to our housing project at 780 Rand Road. So I think we're trying our best to find those dollars where they are available. Other things we're considering, like I said, the RV fees, other fees, and then City Council just had a conversation. Was it the last meeting where we talked about Debt 101? Or was it 2 meetings ago? So, which was a great introduction to how the city has financial policies and what opportunities we might have for debt, by which there's a lot of different things there. I'm not talking about any particular kind of debt, but I think if you are interested in that, it would be great to watch that meeting and maybe review the slides that were presented. So we're doing kind of a deep dive into that. This is just a quick, very list of some of the things that were started or completed through your work last year on this budget committee. You provided the opportunity to promote a police officer to a police sergeant. That was a significant change that has really helped our department. We talked about the state fire marshal grant. You provided funds for safe routes to schools. That was a demonstration project on 17th and 18th, some of which will become permanent as a result of that work. Probably most exciting are those new traffic lights. So I almost want to start a betting pool as to which one's going to open first, Cascade and Rand, or second and Oak, but they are both so close to the finish line, within a month. That'll look really different. And those were both decades in the making. So very exciting to have those happen. So these are some of the things that many of these things are in the council work plan and others are just opportunities or issues that came up throughout the year that we addressed. So I feel like it's been a productive year for the city. One of the really important things I want to highlight, and I hope Chief Olsey will talk about this in more detail when he presents next week, is our police department was recently awarded DUII Law Enforcement Agency of the Year. So this is not on the number of DUIs, although there are some, we have many, but really about the quality of work that the officers do when they do the stops, how they gather their evidence, the information that was provided to the DA. And so the district attorney nominated them for this award. And I believe had 100% conviction rate for like the DUI charges that went forward. All of them were successful because our staff is really expert and smart about how they apply the laws and how they recognize impairment and do their work. So congratulations to you and to the department. Good work. Looking ahead, we will continue those essential services. I said that's the foundation, right? That is the day-to-day work that we do every day. We will continue to work on the projects identified in the council work plan. Many of them are multi-year projects. They're rarely done in 12 months. We'll continue to work on the capital improvement plans. That's what we'll talk about in the last week. We'll do that deep dive. We'll further the city council conversation about what opportunities we might have for taking on debt in a very smart and responsible way. And then council will start on their next set of goals. I know this year was we had set a 2-year work plan, which meant some things that I know people would love to work on. I keep saying, nope, you already got a set of projects. So I know there's a long backlog of lists that we're all excited to start talking about. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions? Because I'm going to talk specifically about city council and the administration budget. All right. Great. So city council has a budget. It's really, it's very small as a part of the percent. But I do want to point out a couple of things that are different this year. The first one is city council is having a conversation. They're not yet taken official action, but they've directed staff to increase the stipend. Currently, council receives $50 a month as your city councilor and $100 a month as a mayor. As many cities are looking at this to how can we encourage and reduce barriers for people participating in elected office, right? It is a major time commitment. It requires time away from your family. For some folks, maybe it requires missing a shift in a job or having to take vacation from job in order to participate. So you'll see in the budget, there's a really major increase for those stipends. That would not apply to the current council. It would only be after a new election. So maybe after someone starts a new term or when a new person starts the office. So but that's in this budget when you look through that. Also part of that conversation was an interest in having a technology stipend, recognizing that when you are a city councilor, you really need to keep your city communications separate from your personal communications, right? Because if there's a public record request, you don't want that stuff getting mixed up. So that's not in this budget, but Chris and I will work on trying to figure out a number and either get that later in this budget or that'll come later as a supplemental piece. You'll see there's a big increase in professional services, and that's for the goal setting. So we can have a professional facilitator for that meeting so everyone can truly participate and really have good use of our time. We didn't have that last year, so you'll see a little bit of a bump and it comes back down. And then trainings and meetings. We have one counselor went to a national conference this year, which we had not previously budgeted for. So we wanted to be specific and include that. And then the Saruta Sister City Exchange. So in the past, this had happened, I think, every 5 years. It's my understanding that I think there's a plan in the works for a delegation to go to Saruta this fall. So we put funds in, should 2 elected officials and 2 staff is what our assumption was. But just recognize that those are things that I think that used to show up in the budget every 5 years. It's been out of the budget for a long time. So putting that back in. And then just quick administration, which Chris will cover in much more detail next week when we talk about the general fund, but today, okay, when Chris talks later. Administration is just all of the glue, right, that supports all of the departments. The big thing that happened this year was we had someone working for the city, Monica Morris, who had been here a long time and had served 2 roles. She was both the accounting manager and the human resources manager. And I think we all agree, and I think Monica would be the first one to say that wasn't sustainable. We are a big enough organization that we truly needed a dedicated HR manager. Monica moved away, and so the position became vacant, and I used that as an opportunity to split those in two. So that happened outside of the normal budget cycle because Monica moved away last summer. But we were able to recruit a new HR manager. Her name is Sandy Galvez. And I think, like, not being modest, like, I think that's the most important thing I've done for the city in my short time here has been really, I think, the support for our staff, the elevating our recruitments, and recruiting is really hard right now. So it has been a good investment, but when you look at your budgets and administration, you will see that is a big increase in cost because we have an additional staffer. There's also a small amount for advertising for recruitments. I have learned that people look for jobs on Indeed. I didn't know that, but Sandy's been very effective using Indeed and placing other ads like if it's an engineering job, we want to advertise that with engineering associations and stuff. So you'll see a small amount there. And then the third thing I wanted to point out with administration again is our IT services are in a point of transition. So we had an IT manager. His name was Bill Bond. He actually is still like on contract with us to help out as needed. But Bill retired last summer. We did a recruitment. We did not have success in finding someone for that job. So in the meantime, as a transition right now, we are outsourcing our help desk responsibilities with RadComp. The city already used RadComp, but we have now negotiated a contract with them where they have someone on site. I think it's 7 hours a week. It's Monday afternoons, Thursday mornings, based at the fire station, but he also makes a point of coming to every building that we have. And then, and also 24/7 service, because previously Bill would respond in the middle of the night, but that wasn't very sustainable. And our RadComp hours charged us extra if we used them after hours. And we are a 24/7 city, right? We have police and fire and sometimes public works who are out there all hours of the day and on weekends and really needed that service. So we have negotiated that. Chris and I have been managing that contract, working really closely. I think staff's response to that has been really positive. They like the person that RadComp has assigned to us. We like the fact that if he's not here, it gets handled remotely. But that's the help desk piece. The other piece of Bill's job that is also being filled by RadComp, but we haven't really identified or delineated this as carefully, is what's the strategy, right? Where is the higher level? We've got help desk, but then there's also what are the infrastructure upgrades we need to make? How soon do we need to upgrade our servers? How's our firewall doing? All of those pieces are a piece that we are working with RadComp, but we still need to evaluate. So I think our plan is right now is we have a 5-year strategic plan. We're on year 5 to really go through that process and then decide, do we want to hire another IT manager or do we want to have some kind of combination of some outsourcing, some inside? It's a really hard spot to have one person supporting a whole city when you have the diversity of services we have and to be like the person who can crawl under the desk and unplug the laptop and the person who is figuring out where you're going for your cloud-based services. Like it's hard to find somebody who's all in that package. So we will be doing that study and really looking forward to those things. So I just wanted to let you know, like we're really in transition of that. If you work for a company or know about like folks who have gone through that transition, talk to me because I'd love to learn from you. But those are the things that that are on my mind and what we'll be working on in the coming months. Those are my comments for you. I hand it over to Chris for like the real information, but happy to answer any questions at this time. All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Say, and this is Chris's second budget with the city.
Yes.
Last year he had started, I think, what, February 13th?
Yes.
And just got thrown in. I think it was on the second day in the job where I was like, oh, by the way, you have to do this budget.
It's easier when you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. So I appreciate how Chris has really taken a deep dive this year, has asked some really smart questions. And if you look at specifically the fee schedule in your budget book, used to be a spreadsheet of really small numbers, and Chris really tore that apart, looked at other cities and kind of reinvented it to be much more user friendly. So I'm really thankful that Chris is part of the city and leading us through this process. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, so in general, what I'd like to do is go through a financial forecast. I'd like to do some just sort of macroeconomic very, very quickly, sort of go state, look at regional, right, look at local, just to try to set the economic climate that I believe that we're going to be in for the next fiscal year. And then we can go into sort of a very, very general high level forecast on what we're looking at for the 3-year forecast. And then we can talk about the administration department, excuse me. And that should cover most of what is supposed to be covered for this meeting. Oh, sorry. So last year, well, when we were discussing the Governor Council of Economic Advisors sort of forecast, there was a projection for a mild, potential of a mild recession. Presumably that was going to be very, very aggressive Fed reaction to an inflationary environment, right? So, sort of aggressive interest rate, sort of monetary policy. I think to many economics' surprise, this past year has been stronger than predicted. Inflation is around the Fed targets. There actually was a Fed meeting today. They did not make any changes in economic policy. Oregon is at or near full employment, and personal income is outpacing inflation. So this is real personal income growth. So in general, it's looking at favorably raising the living standards of Oregonians. So most economic projections indicate that the state economy will grow steady but slowly in 2024. The state of Oregon has never missed a national expansion or contraction. In general, it follows national trends. This is, the severity of it can change, but in general, Oregon has been in lockstep with the overall greater trend. Oregon productivity gains have outpaced the nation. Local job growth is in the middle of the pack across states, and the main driver for that is the migration and population growth. That has lagged Oregon historically, and most Oregon economists have reduced their estimates for population growth. Current population growth is about 0.6% for the foreseeable future. We'll talk a little bit about the impact of that on sort of the general economy. But in general, the state's moving away from a strong post-pandemic rebound towards a more sustainable economy centered on long-term fundamentals. So the outlook is positive. Inflation, we talked about last year as being a significant focus, right? So last year at this time, we were looking at past year's CPI increase of about a little over 7%. This past 12 months, CPI was 3.6%. The Fed target is 2%, right? So we're still above what the Fed targets. And so again, forecasts have come down a little bit as far as Fed rate cuts. They are not now expected to be as quickly as previously anticipated. Most forecasts are for 3/4 basis point rate cuts in this coming year. And again, as I mentioned, there was a Fed meeting today. This still seems to hold true, right? There is no indication that the Fed's going to cut rates anytime soon. And they're quoting sort of inflation being outside of this 2% target as the primary reason. So as we look a little bit more locally, so employment for Hood River County is currently at 3.2%. It fell by 1 percentage point over the past year, and it now sits as the second lowest unemployment rate in the state of Oregon. So extremely positive and strong sort of employment regionally. Housing remains the big challenge, right? So new housing supply has not kept pace with demand in either the ownership or the rental markets. Obviously, the 780 Rand project looks to address sort of this specific issue, and the reduction in net immigration reduces the overall size of the available labor force in the years ahead. right? So, lack of housing, lack of immigration, cost of housing, right, as being a factor for that, will have some expected impact on regional growth. And then Hood River County specifically, it does have a critical shortage of affordable housing stock. And this was some of the information that was presented by our affordable housing partner CDP for the 780 Rand Road project. And I just want to sort of call to attention so we can understand the magnitude of the issue. 43% of Hood River's renters are cost burdened, meaning they pay more than 30% of their income towards housing. 22% of renters are severely cost burdened, meaning more than 50% of their income is going to housing alone, right? And so it is addressing, sort of this sort of cost imbalance, which is very, very important as far as not just attracting people to this market in order to fill jobs, but also to contribute to real, true income growth. March 2024, the League of Oregon Cities issued their State of the Cities report. I wanted to note it here because, excuse me. So there are a number of items that are outlined in the League of Oregon Cities report that I think are true to the city of Hood River as well. In general, states are feeling good about where they are as far as the current states of their sort of budgets and economies, but they're facing a couple challenges, right? One, ARPA fund monies, which was supporting and providing additional revenues to many cities in Oregon, have now expired. And I'll talk about sort of what that means to the city of Hood River. There has been an increase in service demand. We've seen that as well, right? So 68% of the cities that have reported an increase in the demand on services. In the budget book, you will see that for both the police and the fire department, a fairly notable increase in service demand for this past year. And the source of funds that are the subject of the city do not necessarily keep up with expenses, especially during sort of inflationary periods. Property tax constraints as a result of Oregon Measures 5 and 50 are limited to 3% growth, right? But most of our expenses are not limited to 3% growth. For many cities, property taxes are the significant majority of their revenues. Franchise fees, although do better, also tend to underperform inflation. And then wages and operating costs, right? So the increase in demand for local services obviously requires sort of more personnel to address that, or just longer hours to address it. And the costs associated with wages, with employment, including benefits, are outpacing revenues as well. So in general, cities are reporting improved financial capabilities, but there is an increase in pessimism about sort of future revenues. The report also outlines some of the city cost drivers. And again, this is things that are, sort of creating issues for the cities as far as outpacing their revenues. We talked about wages and salaries, infrastructure maintenance and repair. Right? We will discuss this during our meetings as well, right? As city infrastructure ages and needs to be replaced, right? There needs to be identified revenue to be able to finance those replacements. PERS contributions, we'll discuss some of the things that the city has done to address that. Employee healthcare, city insurance, right? And then obviously debt service as interest rates rise, sort of more expensive cost of debt. Locally, for the city of Hood River, there are some advantages that the city has when compared to other areas. So generally, the city is better positioned as a result of a couple factors. A more diverse revenue base. So the city of Hood River has a significant contribution to its general fund revenues from lodging tax and parking revenues. As a result of its sort of tourist destination. Both of these are contributors to are revenue contributors where other cities do not have this in the same proportion. The creation of the urban renewal areas, leveraging the tax increment financing that's available in the urban renewal areas in order to increase assessed values, right? So hyper-focused investment in specific areas that create additional development that allow properties to be reassessed and then returned to the property tax rolls, you know, at a significantly higher assessed value. You know, the formation of the West Side District, right, is another example of sort of using that tool in order to address longer term revenue growth. Completion of collective bargaining agreements. The city is completing the last of its outstanding labor agreements. This is very, very significant for the city as its wage assurance for the near future, right? And so understanding what labor costs will be with regards to effective budgeting. PERS contributions. In fiscal 2021, the city took advantage of a program as well as additional funding that allowed for it to establish a PERS side account. This PERS side account results in lowering employer annual PERS charges. And so the charges that the contributions that the city is making to the PERS is reduced as a result of these prior actions on behalf of the city as far as establishing side accounts. And then infrastructure and maintenance. I think that Public Works, along with our group, has taken a lot of care in trying to understand sort of important infrastructure and maintenance that needs to be done, but then balancing those project costs with financing options that are supported by existing revenue, right? And so, again, as we go through the budget, we'll look to outline sort of steps that have been taken in that regard. I'll pause here in a moment because now we'll sort of go into the 3-year forecast. Just as far as anything that we've discussed so far, are there any questions or comments?
I got a question. So just on the rental burdens, do we know what the percentage of Hood River citizens is who rent versus who own? Like, how big is the burden? You know, if there's only 10% of the population that rents and 90% owns, do we have a breakdown of that, or?
Actually, more than half the staying population in the city is are renters. As
Okay.
compared to homeowners.
Okay.
I think in our housing needs analysis in 2015, Justin Nelson, city planning director, we were close to 50-50, and you continue to see the number shift more towards rental population away from home ownership. Another piece, you'll see those numbers actually going down over time as rent burden has become actually fewer people, which on its face looks like a great number. In reality, those people are being displaced. So I'm no longer rent burden because I moved.
Right.
So watch the trends, the numbers, watch the underlying concerns and the loss of those that are really on the margins at risk. Leave the community.
Thanks.
My understanding, it's the governor's priority to ensure that there's more housing. And there was a bill or something like that that she just passed recently. How does that impact Hood River?
I'm going to turn to you again.
Governor's housing package, series of bills and funding. Some of the ways that it's impacted the city is, you know, some of the funds that have come specifically in Senate Bill 1530. The city applied and was recipient of $2.4 million in funds to be directed towards rent growth and infrastructure demands. We will utilize those funds to help prop up the economics of the housing. The city is a sponsor really of that project and invest both general funds, unrestricted funds, and some of the money that we've invested there. There are some regulatory changes in that have some sunset that we tracked, but it doesn't build. There's some things, and there's funds, there's some regulatory relief that has gone in, but at this point it's efficacy is to be determined, retracted through the short session the entire time, because we're really interested in housing's clearly your top priority and has been for the last decade. Trying to understand, you know, the motive behind it, see how it will impact us, its impact on our operations, and how does it harmonize with local initiatives, to be determined. There's a lot built into it. It was hugely supported on a bipartisan way, which is, you know, worthy in itself. But we'll see how does it manifest locally, and does it move the needle on anything.
Is there anything different that we can do, just because we are unique to some other areas in Oregon, right? We have a lot of limitations because of the national scenic area. Is there, I mean, anything that we could do to ensure, how do we ensure that the governor understands, yes, this is a challenge everywhere, but we have even more restrictions here locally?
I would note, thank you for the question, Councillor. I think Hood River has been very involved. Joel Madsen from our Housing Authority and Development Corporation was a member of the governor's production strategy task force. I think the other things are, again, having the conversations with our elected officials. Representative Helfrich met with us to talk about specifically Mount Adams and Cascade Roundabout, or that intersection and how that develops, how that might block future growth in the west side of town. And Representative Helfrich was able to bring someone from the governor's office and someone from GLCD to that meeting on Zoom to discuss, you know, specific issues that block Hood River. So we do think that that we're getting a fair bit of attention at the state level. I was also thinking if it would be helpful, we could send out the governor's task force or advisory group, put together a final report of their recommendations. We could send that out to you. Some of that involves like brownfield land, state-owned land that could be surplus, and we all have our eye on the ODOT yard at state. You know, the expansion, one-time expansion of the UGB, that was another piece that came from the legislature that we think probably is not a tool that the city of Hood River could use, but it is possible. So if it would be helpful to all of you, we can certainly send a link to that report if you'd like to review that more in depth. It'll definitely be a conversation we'll be having for a long time. And already work is starting on legislative concepts for bills in the long session that will start in January of 2025. So we're definitely active in that realm.
I think the only thing I would add to that is I think that you know, understanding that what we recognize as priorities will be recognized from at the state level, right? And so to Abigail's point, I think the general properties and regions that we recognize as sort of the outlets and best opportunities for housing, you know, anecdotally, we're getting good feedback from the state that they understand sort of that as well, right? So I don't think that what we're pushing as priorities is happening in a vacuum, right? It's being sort of recognized at the state level. I will also add sort of to the credit of our sort of planning and building department. You know, the activity that's been happening with regards to the enforcement of the short-term rental ordinances, with regards to that sort of transition period that we're in right now, has been an important sort of effort as far as preserving, right, and sort of establishing you know, sort of new rental opportunities. Or opportunities that were sort of not available before, right? So when we talk about the things that are happening in the city that are sort of outside of new construction and development, I think it's important to note that. The only other thing, and I want to sort of stop here because this is a much larger policy conversation, but one of the challenges that we do have is that land at zero is not enough, right? And so, you know, without significant subsidies, right? Just having sort of land and available land designated for affordable housing construction is not enough, right, to sort of get that built. And I think that, you know, sort of as we go through the 780 Rand Road sort of experience and sort of get that up and going, I think everyone will have a very, very strong appreciation for how many things need to come together, you know, at sort of how many different levels in order to get something financed and constructed. So, but the state focus is important.
Chris?
Yeah.
You mentioned the urban renewal allowed us to take properties off and then bring them back on at higher values or something?
Yes,
Do you, like, that seems to be a popular topic of conversation, maybe around town,
yeah.
when people bring up those questions. Is there an easy or quick explanation for it or a resource? Because when I go and look up the urban renewal, it is so complex, it's pretty confusing, I think, for a lot of people, unless you invested a lot of time into it.
Yeah, so it's very complicated. I will try to address it as sort of simplistically as possible. So property tax assessments, right, are the city's assessment is a portion of the property tax that residents pay, right? Other portions of that tax go to school districts, right? So neighboring fire districts, sort of all the different groups that are sort of receiving portions of that property tax. What the urban renewal area does is it freezes the existing assessment for all the participants, including the city. And then any incremental growth of that property tax is directed specifically to that district from all of the sort of participants of those revenues, right? So whereas development and initiatives that can be done at the city level, right, without an urban renewal area would only be done with sort of city resources, are now done at sort of the regional level, right? And then all the regions participate or will participate and benefit when the change in property uses or the development of properties allow those properties to be reassessed, right? The reassessment is really the one avenue by which property taxes are increased by more than the 3% cap. So all of these resources are being used to increase the assessed value of these properties. And then upon completion, those get returned back to the rent roll or the property tax rolls at the higher valuation.
Is that like, I mean, in 30 years talking, or because that's when it goes up to everybody else, but.
Yeah.
My favorite example is the waterfront. We invested some urban renewal benzene to that little fire and it just blew up so fast. It would have taken much longer to develop Ferment and Stoke and Solstice without we put in some of the infrastructure under Port Way, and then all of a sudden it was an environment where the private sector could really grow quickly.
Okay.
And I mean, you could ask me, but so that waterfront was established what year?
2009.
2009, right? Had not been, if not extended, it would have returned to the tax rolls this year, but will be extended for a couple more years.
We have a Hood River 101, or sorry, Urban Renewal 101 video on our website. I'll ask the city reporter to send that link out to everybody because it is such a complex topic.
Okay, yeah.
Just on economics, when Waterfront was established, the assessed valuation was $8 million. Today, the valuation with the investment of the funds that were generated within that district, they do now have an $80 million assessment. So on termination of the district, all the property that mathematically 8 to 80 million goes back now to the taxing districts. So they are now will be the beneficiary of all the investment in that.
Were you asking for some sort of like plain language material though? Is that what I heard at the beginning of?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Like, I mean, the resource to tell
Yeah.
people like, because I don't understand that much, and
Right.
everybody's spinning around in different
Yeah.
views.
Yeah, the tax increment one I want to be helpful.
Yeah, and also, I guess the most important thing is urban renewal does not increase taxes.
No,
Like if your house is in the urban renewal district, your taxes do not go up because of it.
Right.
I used to do urban renewal consulting for 7 years, so if anybody really wants to know, I'd be happy to talk to you about it.
I'm about to get it. I got a B-.
I'll give you your grade.
Okay, so I'll jump into the 3-year forecast. And so I will focus on the general fund. So the general fund revenues, this is the most diverse source of revenues for the city, referred to generally as unrestricted revenues. And so when people talk about government, they most often are thinking about the general fund and general fund departments. There are 5 revenue sources that represent over 85% of the city's unrestricted revenues. And again, the city of Hood River is fortunate in that it has a diverse set of revenues. Property taxes represent about 33% of all general fund revenues. Lodging taxes is 20%, followed by franchise fees, ambulance billing, and then parking revenue. Those five sources make up 85%. The remainder are smaller sort of state revenue shares, other taxes received from the city, and then other services fees that are charged by individual departments. For this fiscal year, the $10.8 million in general fund revenues represents about a 2% increase over what we anticipate will be this current fiscal year general revenue receipts. So revenue forecasting as far as historical, you'll note that fiscal year 2023 was the high water mark at about $11.3 million in total general fund receipts. That was the last year that the city received ARPA funds, COVID relief funds. So that included about $900,000 of the COVID relief funds, combined with the period of time when the general environment was in this full sort of post-pandemic recovery. We will look for this fiscal year to end this fiscal year, fiscal 24, at about 10.6 million. And then the financial projection for this coming fiscal year looks for total general fund revenues of about 10.8 million. The future projection looks for 11.2 for fiscal 26, and then it's not until fiscal 2027 that the city looks to sort of eclipse the previous high watermark sort of during fiscal 2023. So the projection for the foreseeable 3-year period looks for very, very conservative revenue growth, as a result of just sort of this strong but not sort of booming top. Yes.
Does that suppose that for the property taxes, are you just doing it by 3%?
Well, no. So there actually is. Let me go to the next slide for that. There are some underlying property tax assumptions. So for this fiscal year, we're assuming a 4% assessed value increase. That's been historical, right? So that's the 3% increase plus whatever development has been reassessed, right? Just in general. So there are some specific urban renewal area impacts that occur in the next couple of years. So as we discussed, the waterfront property taxes will return to the city tax rolls in fiscal 26 and 27. Over those 2 years, that's about $85 million of total assessed value that is returning to the city tax rolls. At the same time, the creation of the West Side District is $140 million in frozen tax base, right? And so $140 million of assessed value will be frozen. So both of those are incorporated into this analysis. Lodging taxes, as we mentioned, is about 20% general fund revenues. Fiscal 24 has been flat to the previous fiscal year. We are calling for a modest 2% growth for fiscal 25. That's consistent with what we're seeing in the early market reports for regional lodging. Also do not anticipate the delivery of any significant inventories for this fiscal year. Parking revenue for this fiscal year, parking is going from $1 to $1.25 an hour. It's the first increase since fiscal 2016, I believe. And so we're looking for a fairly healthy increase in parking revenue as a result of the increase in parking rates. In all, looking at all general fund revenue, about a 2% growth rate year over year. Slightly higher on the go forward basis, 4% fiscal 26, driven mostly by the repatriation of the West Side tax increment, and then 3% in fiscal 2027.
You meant waterfront, not West Side.
Started waterfront. Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do, the short-term rentals, do they contribute to the lodging tax or do they add into a significant income for the city?
Well, so with regards to how we reported, they will be in lodging taxes. The largest portion of lodging tax is actually the hotels.
Hotels?
Yeah.
Probably not
Just
too
unsure.
significant of an impact.
Just, I mean, not inconsequential, right?
Yeah.
But not nearly as significant as that.
Gotcha.
And we're hoping that it will have a positive impact on that other issue that Chris mentioned, the housing as an economic development barrier. If we could have workers in those housings instead, we lose the hotel tax, but we gain a robust companies able to have workers. That's the theory anyway.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a question for Dustin, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's also that it's TLT from short-term rentals is not as recoverable because they're not businesses keeping books, et cetera, like, you know, nationally trended. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. Fair assessment, most of your corporate flag bearing hotels have professional accountants and teams, and their recovery TLT is higher generally than entrepreneurs, pass money folks who do this on the side. So they are accountable, however, maybe not as necessarily as effective in returning full amount.
Outside the general fund, there are restricted revenues. So restricted revenues relates to road fund, water, sewer, storm. These are outside of the projections when we just talk about the general fund, but they are still significant revenue receipts to the city. So for fiscal 2025, these restricted funds represent nearly $9 million in aggregate revenue received to the city. And obviously, these are what we talk about when we are discussing what is the funding for infrastructure projects. This has had a fairly consistent average annual growth of about 4.6%. These are the fees in large part that are subject to the fee schedule that is in part of your budget book. And these are approved by city council, generally tied to some sort of inflationary index. And so these are designed specifically to try to keep pace with inflation, outside inflation. Very, very quickly on the restricted revenue forecast. These are based on a 5-year rate study that have been prepared. We're on year 4 or 5. The rate structure targeted a 4.4% increase for water and sewer revenues. The structure of that is not necessarily sort of an across the board 4% increase, but sort of a combination of charges between flat fees and what we call commodity charges or charges above a certain threshold. Stormwater is a little bit of a larger increase as there was seen a larger deficit in that fund. Stormwater is our 14% annual rate increase. These were originally adopted by resolution. The original report did not assume the inflationary environment that we had recently experienced. And so as part of our budget, we'll be looking for sort of a 1-year early revisiting of these rate studies to see if there are any adjustments that need to be made with regards to these restricted revenues. The other restricted revenue that is important for government receipts, and Abigail mentioned this, the state and local gas tax is based on the state motor fuels taxes and growth rates. This feeds the road fund. These are projected to flatten during the forecast period. And when Abigail mentions that, sort of the changes in state revenues, specifically, everyone's looking at this. Moving to general fund expenses from revenues. Personnel services are by far the largest portion of general fund expenses. About 67% of the general fund operating expenses are in personnel. For this fiscal year, we've seen an 8% increase in all wages. That this is both a function of cost of living increases and negotiated collective bargaining agreement increases, as well as the addition of the new HR position. And I will second Abigail, the creation of this position and specifically the person that's been brought on to fill this position has been a significant benefit to the city. You know, it has, as both a finance director and an employee, it has been a fantastic addition. Other things that the city is dealing with, and again, you know, sort of just indicative that the city is seeing the same pressures that other cities are reporting. So both health and property and casualty insurance, so 10% increase expected in health insurance premiums. There's a little note here that this is 6 months because the health insurance premiums run on a calendar basis as opposed to our city's fiscal year basis. So these increases would not occur until January 1. The property and casualty has been significant, 8.7% increase in property and casualty. Specifically, property liability rates have increased 16.5%, and these have been significant for a number of years. And so it's unclear sort of when and if this will be. But that is the climate and projections that we're seeing for both health and then property and casualty insurance. Sorry, I'll skip this. So on account, right? This is sort of the go forward projection. Forecasting both the current and the future budgets where reoccurring revenue sort of matches reoccurring expenses. For the current fiscal year, fiscal 2024, we would expect that the budget will have may have a modest surplus. Going forward, we're looking at a much more managed sort of budgets of sort of matching expenses to revenue. In our current budget, when we discuss the general fund and specific impacts on sort of reserves, we are matching sort of recurring revenue with recurring expenses. But there are certain elective decisions that are being made in the budget, right, that are going to have impacts as far as sort of draws on the reserves. As we go through the budget, you know, we will discuss some of the impacts that will sort of cause that will need to be funded from general fund reserves. So when we look at the City of Hood River budget, right, this is not unlike what other municipalities are seeing, right? So when the other municipalities are reporting that they have specific confidence in their current sort of state of affairs, right, but have concern for the future, this is specifically what they're looking at, right? So near term revenues are matching expenses, maybe even running small operating surpluses. But as they look out in the calendar, right, this becomes a little bit tighter. This is a reproduction of a chart that's in the budget book. Just looking at the sort of City of Hood River full-time equivalents, currently 74.8 employees. This chart shows the urban renewal administrator, which is not an expense of the city, but an expense of the URA, but an employee of the city. And then obviously includes the new HR position that we've discussed. Outstanding debt per capita and outstanding debt in general. The city currently has an outstanding debt balance of about $16.2 million. That equates to approximately $1,800 per capita. I want to discuss with regards to some of the assumptions that are in our budget for this year. For purposes of infrastructure projects in the water, sewer, and stormwater fund, we are looking at about an addition of $6.3 million worth of debt. This is budgeted debt that would be supported by the restricted fees that are within these funds. So when we're looking at the additions of new debt, we are matching it to sources of repayment. And so I think that's a very, very important distinction when we're talking about sort of addition of other debt.
Can you, just to put it in context in this chart, like how much is that per capita? Like how much does that bar go up?
It would take it from $1,800 per capita to $2,500 per capita. Right.
So still well.
Yeah, so I should know, excuse me. That green dotted line is sort of the Oregon statutory debt limit. So significantly below sort of statutory levels. When we discuss debt and the addition of debt, particularly as it relates to infrastructure projects, it is more a function of debts, funds available for debt service repayment than it is the ability to assess debt. And you'll see that sort of so it's the period of 2013. 2013 was the peak. As far as sort of debt per capita, that was $3,700 per capita. And I should note that that's not adjusted for inflation, right? And you'll see also significantly closer to sort of Oregon statutory limits. So when we're talking about the addition of debt, we'll be talking about it in the terms of sort of why is it appropriate, right? It's appropriate both with regards to the sort of per capita measurements, right? Overall city measurements. It's appropriate because the sources of repayment, right, size correctly against debt service.
Chris?
Yeah.
It looks to me like in 2016, the green line was like 5,000. And now it's almost 10,000. So in like 8 years, it doubled. Is that just because everything got so fancy?
Everything got very fancy. The Oregon statutory requirements is based on real market value, right? And so when we're talking about property tax rolls, we're referring to assessed market values, right? Which generally are significantly below real market value, specifically during periods of sort of escalation, right? So when you see this sort of hyper growth of the debt limit, that's a function of growth in real market value property value.
Thank you.
Why, like, if looking at the blue line,
Yeah.
or the blue bars, I mean, the governmental portion went way down.
Yes. So government debt is divided between what they call government debt and business type debt, right? And so when we talk about debt for the restricted funds, road, water, sewer, storm, that's considered business type debt. When we're looking at general full faith and credit debt, that is outside of those restricted funds. So for example, some of this debt was a voter authorized bond for the fire department, for the construction of the fire department.
Oh, right.
Right. That's considered government debt. That would sort of be
Paying it off.
that would be in the blue here, right? And so as that gets paid off, that portion decreases. Right now, the only government debt that is outstanding is the debt that was used to purchase Rand Road, that piece of property. The remainder of the outstanding debt is considered business type debt, and the additions that we're talking about would also be considered business type debt. All right, I will dive quickly here into the administrative department. This is the first department they'll be discussing. In your books, it's outlined in pages 114 through 117. So what is it? Right, so when we talk about the administration budget and the administration fund, these are the type of things that in a normal business context would be referred to as overhead. So shared services, right? Sort of shared employee services, shared sort of materials and services. These administrative costs are totaled and then expense allocated to all the citywide departments, including the urban renewal areas. Things that are in the administration fund, obviously just other than general administration, finance activities, human resource activities, information technology, legal services, all of these are within the administrative fund. For fiscal 24-25, we're looking at a 7% increase in budgeted expenditures within this department. And I can go through some of that. So citywide, the administrative charges is about $1.7 million. This represents about 4% of total citywide personnel, materials and services, and capital expenses. Of this 1.7 million, 1.6, about 89%, is allocated to departments outside the urban renewal area. The remaining 11% is allocated to the urban renewal. In the individual department budgets and in the individual fund budgets, you will see an administrative charge to each of the funds as an expense, and that administrative charge is the allocation to any individual fund of the administrative department overhead. So the right-hand side is a sort of an outline of, you know, sort of all the items and their percentage contribution as far as expense to the administrative budget. You know, 62% of the total administrative budget, incorporating 8 FTE, is in the administrative fund. Again, payroll expense is part of the overall increase in the fund year over year is about 5.5%. Again, this is the result of sort of new positions that are added, as well as some, you know, sort of replacement positions. Materials and services, significant contributions to material and services, IT services. So this is more than just the RADCOM contract that we discussed. So this is the RADCOM contract plus the sort of 24-hour unlimited call, the on-site RADCOM employee. But there's also sort of all the software subscriptions that is in this number as well as some additional IT services. There's a significant amount of IT and IT spend that sort of goes in part of running the city. Professional services, $95,000 allocated towards that. There are a couple carryover items from last fiscal year. The remaining billing and work to be done for the bond advisory. As a background, this is the consultant that the city has brought on to help us outline a debt strategy with regards to funding some of the infrastructure projects, as well as an overall bond strategy that may be implied sort of should city council elect for any projects to fund projects within their concentrated sort of target projects. A carryover of grant writing services. Translation services for $20,000. This is both for court and for city council, as well as other translation requirements. And then, as Abigail had outlined, we're putting about $25,000 in for the formation of the IT 5-year plan, as well as sort of other ancillary projects that may be funded out of this professional services.
Chris, may I make a comment?
Mhm.
I believe translation services was in a different fund, it was in the non-departmental. And we moved it here, so I don't know that, I mean, so as you look at the, like, I don't know it's an increase here, but it should be a decrease in that other.
Yeah, so what Abigail's referring to is that there's another fund called non-departmental. And that is, most of the revenue goes into non-departmental. The other aspects and expenses, pretty limited expenses, are things that cannot be allocated to other funds. And so what Abigail's referring is that translation services were originally in non-departmental and will move to administration because it's the benefit of sort of the city departments. Sorry, go ahead.
What about communications? How do we expect that's gonna change? I would love to not have Jackie do a lot of our communications.
For a moment there, I thought you were gonna say you would love not have Jackie, and I was gonna.
No, Jackie,
Deeper
we
conversation.
appreciate you. How do we expect that to change over the next couple of years?
Thank you for the question, Counselor. I think, so Jackie Vanderpoy is our staffer who is both communications and engagement, and also does leads our equity work internally. As we brought her on, at the same time that we have PageWorks is the group that we've been contracting with for a lot of our communications work, Paige and Roundtree, Bruce, who are nearing retirement and looking to step back. So we still have them. They're actually in the their contract is in the non-departmental.
Okay.
But we continue to have that conversation as they continue to step back about what can they outsource, and then what does Jackie keep doing. So we continue that conversation, and you and I have definitely talked about wanting to really focus on our engagement and equity work.
So I want to bring this up here just so that we're having the conversation. It would be ideal to have one FTE dedicated solely to communications, so that Jackie can focus on other equity matters and engaging with department heads. So that when we come to a council meeting, we know that that lens has already been reviewed in whatever's being proposed.
I appreciate that. I would make two really quick comments. One is, I think Jackie, she's in her second year on the job, and I think has done a good job of trying to create expectation across the organization that equity and engagement are everyone's job.
Absolutely.
Right, so that it is not just on one person, but we're trying to build capacity throughout the organization. And a second point that was equally brilliant,
It'll come back.
it's gone at this moment, I'm sorry.
Maybe I'll add another, and yeah, my intention isn't that Jackie's the only one that's doing it, but that maybe she's the one that's taking additional trainings and then helping like the train the trainer model.
For sure.
For everyone else.
Yes. Thank you, and as part of our building our own capacity, we have a staff DEI committee, and they are working on what does training look like for staff and other pieces. And then my second point was, we actually have some funds in the administration budget specifically tied to equity, so that we can do a little bit more study about what are we trying to accomplish and what resources do we need. So I think that's when we can, that when your person's like $2,500 in this year's budget. For training and for study.
Yeah, I also think that, Abigail has put in the budget, some additional training. And as well as sort of conferences and whatnot, I think with regards to sort of that specific intent.
And the 20,000 would include work that, or the engagement that we'd like to see specifically around like the development code and any other future endeavors?
For in this translation.
Yeah.
Services?
Okay.
Yes.
Just the payroll expenses. And sorry, I was just looking at this because I haven't prepared for this one, but it looks like salary is going down for the proposed budget versus current budget. Is that an error, or is the proposed, or is this current budget somehow extra high?
So I'll have to look at the specific numbers. There has been a change, so there has been changes, and so there is not an IT position, nor there is the FTE for an IT position, but there's not the salary associated with an FTE with that position. So of the 8 FTE, right, there's only sort of 7 and a quarter that actually have salaries associated with it. There is the addition of the HR, and then there is the replacement sort of an account manager. So there have been changes with regards to sort of salaries. The overall payroll expense should have increased 5.5%.
That also with them,
I'll have to look at it.
so yeah, maybe check that.
Yep. Last thing I'll add is audit and related services. Audit and related services, $85,000, significant portion of the work this city does. We'll begin the audit process right after this budget process. Lastly, if you want to look at some of the city's financial policies, there is resolution 2020-07 that is in your book. And then there are some sort of outlines as sort of just general principles with regards to the budget and budget creation. Creating a structurally balanced budget, creating appropriate, operating reserves, and then establishing certain funds for fleet replacement, long-term liability charges, right, that are put into the budget in order to help smooth out future liabilities. The remaining schedule, May 8th, 6 o'clock, we'll go through general fund departments, police, fire, planning, parks, other general fund, building department, excuse me, and then May 15th, after the URA budget committee, public works, so roads, water, sewer, stormwater. Excuse me. There's also the time for public comments and questions, as well as final deliberations for the budget. Busy couple of meetings. And that's it for me. Thank you. Any other additional questions?
Any information that you guys need from Chris or staff in between now and when we get together next week? Questions, comments, anything else?
Great, no, give us some homework.
Yep.
And I will mention, so what we really appreciate is if you have questions in advance, then we can work on those and come prepared with answers. So my thanks to Councilor Saunders, who sent us questions yesterday. And Chris worked with department heads to create answers, which got the city recorder sent them out as a memo today. For those folks that had a chance to see this, but the most important one being, what is a meter setter, which I also did not know. But Adam, Public Works Director, actually provided a picture of one, so, no question is too small, and no question is too big for us to try to answer. And so if you send us a question, we will send, if we have timing works, we will send an answer out in writing back to the whole group, because we want all of you to get the same answers in the same. But please feel free to send those either to Chris or Jen or myself, and we will get those.
Earlier is always better, it gives them more time to get a more wholesome answer back to you.
That's right.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Areas we're talking about folks asking questions and you're not sure what the answer is.
Yeah.
There's a great opportunity for public engagement coming up. I wanted you all to know so that you can fractalize it out to your people. I'm gonna be giving a State of the City address at the Rotary Club on May 23rd, Thursday. But we specifically arranged with Rotary that other folks can come. We don't have to be in Rotary. So I just, in all avenues, trying to get that word out there because I think folks who are interested will find that interesting. So May 23rd, Thursday, I think it's noon at the Rotary Club. So just let folks know who seem to have the itch to ask questions. They can get certainly not all the answers, but some information there.
Cool, thank you.
Nothing else? If there's nothing else, then this committee stands a recess.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you all.
Cool.